Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts of the Apostles and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Tonight we're starting a very important set of studies in what we've been studying the last several months. As we enter into the last 3 chapters of the book of Revelation, we're going to see a total change from what we've been studying, which concerns that last 7 years, and what comes after that. See, this is the things that I'm looking forward to. Okay? This is the stuff that I've been waiting for all these months. And these are the things we've studied and we want to look forward to as Christians. If you want to do an interesting study, one of the things about the Bible is it's such a massive book, and there's so many stories in here and so many things being taught that sometimes you lose track of the big picture. If you want to get a real good look at the big picture, sometime this week, I've got it on your notes there too. Read Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Then immediately go to Revelation 20 and read the last 3 chapters, 20, 21, and 22. You'll see a lot of big, beautiful things about how the first 3 chapters of the Bible start telling a story, and the last 3 chapters tell the end of the story. Keep in mind now, Moses wrote the first 3 chapters about 3,500 years ago. Now, John would have wrote the last chapters about 1,900 years ago. So they were spread apart by nearly 2,000 years. And yet that story still holds together very, very neatly. Satan, since the beginning of time, there's been a war going on. And Satan's been trying to overthrow God and trying to manipulate man to his own ends. Trying to destroy what God's trying to do through us. Basically, there's been 3 major attacks, or what I call the 3 strikes. Okay? First one was at the Garden of Eden. Remember in Genesis chapter 3 when Satan first came up and caused man to fall. The second strike actually continues through the Old Testament but culminates at Calvary. The second strike is because he's trying to kill the Messiah. He's trying to kill Jesus. And that he starts looking for him, remember, in Genesis 3. But he doesn't finally, he thinks he kills him at Calvary in the New Testament. The third strike we read about last week. This is when Jesus comes back the second time, and he's gathered all the armies of the world, remember, to stop Jesus from coming back and taking the throne. And that's 3 times he's tried, and 3 times he's failed. 3 strikes you're out, right? And that's how that goes, and that's only fair and right. Now, tonight we're going to talk about what comes after that great war that we call Armageddon. What comes after those 7 years. We've gone over so much in the last few months. Okay? The time we're going to talk about tonight covers a very special period, and it has a very special name. We've been over it many times, but I want us to go over it one more time. The name of this period first appears in the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 12. Who has that?
For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is lifted up, and upon everyone that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low.
Okay. The day of the Lord is the period we're talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Okay? Now, when I was growing up in church, I always heard about Judgment Day. The day of the Lord, Judgment Day. Like it, all these things we're talking about tonight will happen in one day. But God has a bigger and grander plan than we ever thought possible. Many times in the Scriptures, he'll refer to this period of time with things that make you know it's going to be longer than what we would call a 24-hour day. But in 2 Peter chapter 3, he tells us exactly how long this period of time is. 2 Peter 3, verses 8 through 10. Who has that?
But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that a day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance.
Okay, Brother Baker just read that Peter there is talking about the day of the Lord. He says that day is 1,000 years long. Now that's one witness. Now in the book of Psalms, David says basically the same thing. Tonight we're going to see the Apostle John say it. I want somebody to keep track and tell me how many times he says this period will be 1,000 years long. Okay? As we go through the chapter tonight. Revelation 20, beginning at verse 1. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent which is the devil, and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. And cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, and he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. Notice a mighty angel comes down here and chains Satan. If you remember the last chapter we were studying, we had the armies of the world facing Jesus, and Jesus takes two particular people from that mass of people and takes them directly to the lake of fire. Who can remember who one of those people were? He does that tonight, but I'm talking about last time. There's two people on the face of the earth that he takes and puts directly in the lake of fire. Can you remember who one of them was?
Beast.
One's the beast. Who's the other? Look back a few verses. The false prophet. The beast and the false prophet. Now he's dealing with the main guy that was behind them. This is the big three that were causing all this to happen. So he lays hold of Satan, and he's going to bind him 1,000 years. Now there are those that are of the persuasion that's called amillennialism. They believe that Satan's bound now. Frank, Satan bound now?
Not from what I can see.
That's right.
Albert, is he bound? Does he ever bother you any? If he's bound on an awful long chain, isn't he? Because he's reaching out and touching many lives today. You can watch the news. You can see it in your life. We're still fighting that old devil today. So it's obvious that this has got to be a time that we haven't seen. Indeed, a time mankind hasn't seen, right? Up to this moment. So it's sometime in the future. Verse 4. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. Now notice we're talking about two groups of people in this verse. First it says they that sit upon thrones, and then it's talking about they that had not taken the mark. Okay? Now they that sit upon thrones, you've got to run that back and find out what noun it refers to. It goes all the way back. The only group we're talking about here is the armies of heaven. Back in chapter 19. Who's the armies in heaven that come back with Jesus? Who's riding those white horses with Jesus? We talked about it last time. The saints. The saints of all the ages. You and I and everybody that's been before us. Okay? So that's the first group. The second group are those that wouldn't take the mark of the beast. Notice. So what period of time did those people live in? They lived in that 7-year tribulation period, right? So that's a group also that's going to be there. And they're going to live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. If you didn't take the mark in the Great Tribulation, what happened? You were beheaded. That's right, Bubba. You had your head chopped off. You couldn't buy food. Or it finally got to the point where they were beheaded for the witness of Christ. They wouldn't take those marks. So those are brought back again. But the rest of the dead lived not again till the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. This is an important phrase we need to hang on to. The first resurrection. There's two resurrections. Isaiah mentions it. He said there's a resurrection of the godly and a resurrection of the sinful, of the evil man. And we're going to see both of those in the class tonight. But this is the first resurrection, the resurrection of the godly at the end of that 7-year period. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. This 1,000-year period is going to be a very special period. Something like we have never seen in our time, and men as a whole haven't seen since the very beginning of time. Isaiah 65 and verse 20 tells us one of the amazing things about that period of time. Brother J.K.
There shall be no more tension after the day, nor an old man that hath not built his day. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinners shall be 100 years old, shall be accursed.
Okay, notice there, if somebody dies and they're 100 years old during this 1,000 years, they're considered still a child. That's a pretty old child, isn't it? I mean, we barely see people reach that age now. And yet during that period of time, they're going to live so long that a 100-year-old person is still considered a child. Have people ever lived that long before? Okay, Genesis 5, verses 5, verse 20, and verse 27. Larry, I think you got that.
Altogether, this is the NIV.
That's okay, go right ahead.
Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. Altogether, Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. Altogether, Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died.
Okay, so it was very common for people to live hundreds of years once before. Let's keep in mind that's before the flood, because that's going to have a great bearing on it. If you'll study your book of Genesis very closely, you'll see that men are going to average over 800 years old up to the time of the flood. After the flood, suddenly they start living shorter and shorter periods of time, till by the time of Abraham, they said Abraham was an old man, but how long did he live? Who can remember?
130, wasn't
I think it's 175. I think it's Jacob.
it? I think you're right.
175. Now that's still older than we understand, but that's just a child. That's just a young person next to 900, 800 years old, see. Before the flood, it was like the Garden of Eden. Remember? God talks about how wonderful it was before the flood as far as the world goes. It's a beautiful place to live in. I also feel we were closer to the sun and it was a lot better environment. Therefore, men were able to live basically 10 times longer than he can live today. Okay? So just as somebody that dies at 10 years old today is considered a child, right? In that time, if they're living 800 or 900 years or 1,000 years, then a 100-year-old person is still considered a very young child. In fact, remember, during that period, there's one young person that did die named Enoch. Enoch only lived to be 300 and something. That was just young for their day. Okay. Now also notice in verse 6, the blessing. We talked about the blessings or the Beatitudes of Revelation. Verse 6 is one of the most powerful of all of them. Blessed and holy. Not just blessed now, but blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. For on such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. The first resurrection. And notice the second death has no power over these people. Okay? To get a little more insight on that, we need to go back and see something that Jesus said once to a man named Nicodemus. One of the most famous chapters of the Bible. But listen to what Jesus is saying in the first 3 verses. Who has John 3, verses 1 through 3?
There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus by night, and said unto him, Rabbi, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. For no man can do these miracles that thou doest, except God be with him. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God.
Okay, so unless a man is born again, born a second time, as an old preacher told me many, many years ago, if you're born twice, you die once. If you're born once, you die twice. Notice in the verse we read here a moment ago, there's a second death. And notice that those that are part of the first resurrection or born again never have to worry about the second death. We'll hear a little more about that as we finish the chapter out. Verse 7. No, wait, before we get to that, let's pick up Revelation 2, verses 10 and 11. It goes along with this about the second death. Who has that?
You're none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that you may be tried. But you shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee the crown of life. He that hath ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. He that overcometh shall be heard of the second death.
Shall not be heard of the second death. Exactly. Okay, so during the period of time that John was writing to those fellows at that church, Christians were dying. We talked about that time many times in the Roman days. They were dying, and Jesus gives them a promise. Be faithful. Just hang on. You may die in that arena, but you'll never be touched by the second death. We need to know a little more about that second death. Verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them. Okay, there's the 1,000 years again. Has anybody kept track of how many times we said 1,000 years? 6 times. 6 times. Not once, not twice, but 6 times in this chapter, John has said this is going to go on for 1,000 years. Pretty emphatic, isn't it? Remember, we talked about the more time something appears, the more important it is. That's what God's saying to us. This is 1,000 years. He knew there'd be a great debate about this as ages wore on and people wouldn't really want to believe it. But he says it very emphatically here. Peter says it. King David says it. This period will last 1,000 years. Pure and simple. In fact, if you'll go back, I mentioned earlier about reading Genesis 1, 2, and 3. In Genesis 1, it mentions 6 times that there's a day, that's an evening, and a morning, and that's a 6-day creation in 1 week. There's no way to really get around that, okay? Because it says very emphatically 6 times, an evening and a morning is a day. So, in other words, just as true as that is in Genesis 1, that's how true this is here. That God's giving it the same weight in this chapter as he gives the literal day in Genesis chapter 1. Now, notice that Satan will be loosed after this period, and he's going to go out to deceive the nations. And notice specifically, he names 2 nations out of all of them that will be the center of the trouble. Gog and Magog. Now, if you'll go back to Genesis 10, you can trace down where they came from, but we're really going to be more concerned about who that nation is today, aren't we, than who it was that descended from Adam. If you'll go back and read Ezekiel 38, verses 1 and 2, it'll give you a clue to who these guys are. Who has that?
And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against God in the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach, and Tubal, and prophesy against him.
Okay, so there we have Gog is a people, right? Magog is there of the land of Magog, so Magog is a land. And also it says he's also the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Strangely enough, in history, we can't find those 2 cities. No ancient history books, no ancient maps mark those 2 cities. But in another reference Ezekiel makes to the same battle, he does call him the king of the uttermost north. And of course, all directions go to Jerusalem. If you'll go to look at a map of Jerusalem and go straight north, there's a line that passes right through it on the map. It'll go straight north, and it passes through. It doesn't pass through a city named Meshach, but it passes through a city named Moscow. And Moscow is the capital city of what nation? Russia, the land of Russia. Okay? Also, Russia, strangely enough, has two capitals. It's such a big land. It has another capital further to the east called Tobolsk. Now, it's not Tubal, but it's called Tobolsk. Very similar, isn't it? Also, that first phrase there, chief prince, which is a very accurate phrase, that also comes out to be Prince of Rosh. There was never a nation called Rosh, but if you'll check the old history books, Russia, in its earlier days, sure enough, one of the names used for it was Rosh. So we get the chief prince of Rosh, the prince of the city of Moscow, and Tobolsk. That's pretty accurate, isn't it? That's 3 for 3. So you can guess pretty well that Russia will be involved in that. All right, now let's go on to verse 10. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Remember the beast and the false prophet we talked about last time. They're in that lake of fire. Now Satan is cast into the lake of fire. And now all judgment, everybody's going to have a share of the judgment now. Verse 11. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. They were judged according to their works. How many sins does it take to put you to hell? How many times would I have to commit murder to be a murderer?
One.
How many times would I need to commit adultery to be an adulterer? One. How many lies do I tell to be a liar? One. How many sins do I have to commit to be a sinner that's bound for hell? One. Okay? Don't care how good the rest of your life is, that one sin is going to mess you up. And that's those that decide they want to be judged by their works instead of what? Their faith in Jesus Christ and what He did. See, this is the ones being judged here. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. Now notice hell is one place, but the lake of fire is a different place. But in the end, hell is going to be put into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Now you know what that second death is. Once again, born twice, die once. Born once, die twice. That's the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Okay? In the scripture it says, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. That's what we're talking about right here tonight. That's that judgment, that last judgment. Although these people will all say that, even Satan himself will say that, it will do them no good at this point because they're standing before the judgment seat. See, the bottom line is what Paul told us when he wrote that if Jesus is not resurrected, then our faith is vain. If Jesus is not coming back, whatever we're doing here doesn't really amount to anything. We can do some good, but if He's not coming back, see, that's the big picture of the Bible. The fact that He did come, He was born, He did die, He was resurrected, He went to heaven, and He is coming back. If we don't have that, we're of all men what? Most miserable. Okay? So if you want to believe anything in the Scripture, this part, you really, really need to believe. This is the most important message we can give to the lost individual. Nothing else will matter to them if they end up here being judged by their works. Because how many do you think is going to pass this test of being judged by their works? Will anybody? Has anybody ever lived a life without sin? Save one. So this is the most important message of the Scripture. See, Jesus is coming back, and I get excited about that. When I watch the news and I get depressed and I see the things happening in the world, I think Jesus said, when those things happen, what? Look up, for your redemption's drawing nigh. right? And that's what excites me about it. See, in the end, everybody's going to get what they deserve. That's justice. Children understand justice. People get what they deserve. What do we all deserve? We all deserve hell, actually, because we have sinned before holy God. Okay? And when he comes back, those that have rejected him, because see, he left heaven, he came down here, he died to take their place. If they've rejected that, really, what do they deserve? Okay? I'm also excited about it because when God comes back, when Jesus comes back, the saints will finally get what they deserve. Now, not according to our works, but according to what Jesus did. Okay? In other words, all the saints down through history that's ever died, they're never going to worry about death anymore. They're never going to worry about being sick anymore. See? I saw a recent study by the World Evangelism Council. Since the time of Jesus until now, over 40 million saints have been martyred for Jesus Christ. Over 40 million. Now here's the thing in the report that really amazed me though. Over 27 million of those that's died have died since the year 1900. Now we always think that most of them died back in the old Roman days, don't we? But over half of them have died in the last 100 years. And right now today, every day, about 1,000 people around the world die because of their Christian faith. That amazed me. That shocked me. You hear what I'm saying? We don't understand that here, do we? We don't understand that. Now, up to the last few years, the main group that were killing Christians were the communists. Right? We remember those stories, don't we, about the communists and what they were doing behind the Iron Curtain. But God's judged that group. The communists are gone, the best we can see. Today, the ones that are killing Christians more than any other group is the Muslims. Over in the Middle East, the ones that's fighting against Israel. All over the world, it's their belief you convert or you die. It's that simple for them. You convert or you die. Or we'll drive you out of the land. It's as simple as that. So see, someday all those that's died for their faith in Jesus will get what they deserve. They'll get their life back, and it's going to be better than any life they've ever had before. See, someday, Willie, someday you're going to be able to see just like an angel sees. Charlie, someday you'll be able to hear as good as an angel hears. Someday, Brother Baker, you and I ain't going to get tired like we do right now. We'll be as strong as the angels someday. Now, we deserve that, but not because of anything we've done, but because of what he did. That's wonderful to me. But see, the thing that really, and it also excites me to think about the fact that Satan's going to finally get what he deserves. You hear me? Satan's finally going to get what he deserves. From the time he made Adam and Eve sin to now, how much damage has he done? Let's not think about history. How much damage has he done in your life, Francis? How much pain has he caused you over the years? I bet you everybody here could tell stories about what the old devil's done to us. Well, guess what? He's going to finally get what he deserves. He goes into that lake of fire. We just got to read that. The thing, though, that excites me most of all about this period of time in these last 3 chapters is of everybody in the universe, I'm excited to think about Jesus is finally going to get what he deserves. You hear me? He is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He hadn't claimed that throne yet. He's on the throne in heaven, but he hadn't come back here yet. And the day's coming when he is going to come through that sky on that horse. And those armies are going to be destroyed. And his saints will reign with him that 1,000 years. And then judgment will come. And then there's going to be a whole new heaven and a new earth. Wherein dwelleth what?
Righteousness.
Righteousness. Sin no more. Cleaned up and done away with. Every knee shall bow. Every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Are there any questions? Thank you. straight into a Christmas play.
Well, I mean, in our study,
Our studies here will be continuing with Exodus. Is Philip here? Frank, do we have any other plans besides Exodus for a while? I guess we're just...
Whatever somebody else might teach for a while.
Yeah, we'll continue through the Old Testament. Come spring, I have some lessons that I may be in some other areas, but I want to wait to see what everybody needs. I'll be pretty busy once we finish Revelation. So after Christmas, I'm going to be a very busy fellow. So I'm going to let others rotate for a while to teach some classes. We've got some more new people come in to teach now. Maybe we can get you to teach on some of this. Okay. Well, we're getting down into the home stretch, aren't we? Starting to see the finish line on this, isn't it? Doesn't it feel good? We studied a lot of deep, dark, troubling things a lot of times we've discussed the last several months. But now we're getting down to the good part. Of course, it's all good. But this part is some of my favorite parts because this is what we get to look forward to. But before we do that, we're going to do something we want to do maybe 2 more times, and then we're going to be done singing the books of the Bible. But I want to be faithful to that because one of the things I want to do is for us to learn these books. So let's all sing that together one more time. You can do it from memory, you can use a song sheet, or you can turn to the table of contents in your Bible as we sing one more time the Bible song. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts of the Apostles and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Tonight we're in Revelation chapter 21. As we're all turning there, I want to give out some Bible verses. Who'd like to read for me tonight?